The criminal underworld was powerful in the Star Wars galaxy, and it controlled ports, space stations, and other docking facilities all across the galaxy, which became bases for smugglers and other underworld types. The most infamous such Shadowports were concentrated in the outlying regions of the galaxy, where the underworld had the most power. But not even the galaxy's coreward regions were free of the underworld's influence, and Shadowports existed even in the core worlds themselves. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Shadowports of the core worlds, colonies, and inner rim, shedding some light on smuggling and corruption in the galaxy's heart.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
To use the definition provided by the Essential Atlas, Shadowports were spaceports where the law was easily bought off or non-existent. Their exact nature varied from port to port. Some Shadowports were mostly legitimate stops that were so busy that it was easy to slip things past customs officials, while others were properly lawless and tolerated all sorts of traffic. Some had been Shadowports from their inception, while others had originally been respectable but went seedy when legitimate trade dried up. Shadowports weren't even necessarily confined to planets. Some were space stations, and a few were even mobile, allowing them to evade sector authorities altogether. Shadowports were most common in the Outer Rim, but they could be found in every part of the galaxy, including the core. The coreward Shadowports were vital outposts for underworld players moving illegal goods into and out of the galaxy's heart, and though there weren't very many of them, there were enough to allow smuggling to thrive even in the most heavily policed sectors of the galaxy. Shadowports in the greater core fell primarily into three categories: ports on planets that had become lawless, hidden bases on obscure low-population worlds, and Shadowports that were hidden in plain sight. Let's start with the first category, with Shadowports on planets that had become lawless to some degree. There weren't too many of these in the core worlds and their surrounding regions, but they did exist, primarily along the border between the core and the unknown regions. A perfect example of just such a Shadowport was Corbin, a lawless world in the inner rim just adjacent to the unknown regions, not far from where Jakku was located in canon. Corbin was originally a mining planet, but when its mines dried up, legitimate interests abandoned the planet, leaving its starports behind. Corbin was left completely without government, and its cities fell under the overt control of criminal factions who turned Corbin into a premier Shadowport. A similar Shadowport was also located near the border of the unknown regions in the part of the greater core disparagingly known as the Negs. Its name was Karatos, and it was actually located on a major trade route, the Namadi Corridor. Karatos was a heavily urbanized planet, and originally it had been a mostly legitimate port. During the time of the Empire, however, Karatos was subjected to a brutal military occupation, and when the Empire collapsed and the occupation ended, it left a power vacuum on the planet. This vacuum was filled by a coalition of pirate gangs who took over the planet and transformed Karatos into a shadow port, using it to ship contraband into the core worlds. Two more prominent inner rim shadow ports were Ord Vaxal and Bogdan. Ord Vaxal was originally a penal colony that was largely taken over by the Hutts of the Basadi clan, who built a secret starport named Oubliette on the planet during the Imperial period. This Shadowport was mostly hidden from prying eyes, but the Empire was aware of its existence and tolerated it. This was despite the fact that Ord Vaxal was quite close to the Corellian Run, and thus gave the Hutts a major foothold near one of the galaxy's most important hyperspace routes. Bogdan, meanwhile, was a small grey rock located directly on the Hydian Way, a major stop for traffic of all sorts heading between the core and the rim. Bogdan and its 20 moons were all lawless and were full of unofficial landing fields and starports, making it an ideal smuggling system. However, Bogdan was one of the more unreliable Shadowports in the core. It was also full of bounty hunters, thieves, and shipjackers who routinely took advantage of the spacers who landed in its lawless ports. The last two lawless ports in the core were Schulstein 5, a colony's shadowport located directly on the Polemian trade route, and Kiryat Olgo, one of the most infamous shadowports in the core worlds. Despite being located fairly close to Coruscant itself, Kiryat Olgo was a hotbed of slavery during the time of the Republic, despite the best efforts of the Jedi to bring order to the planet. 5 shadowports in the colonies and Inner Rim were more obscure smugglers' haunts that were left off many official star charts, little habited planets that were ideal sites for secret smuggler bases. Reese, an Inner Rim world located in the Negs, was a prime example of this class of shadowport. Despite its proximity to the core, it was far off the beaten path, and, as a result, it was a smuggler's haven, home to numerous unregulated starports. Merca, a forest planet in the Inner Rim's farthest reaches, was a similar case. It was obscure and was populated almost exclusively by smugglers and other outlaws who built small starports deep in the planet's forests. Marika was chosen as a shadowport primarily for 2 reasons. Firstly, its trees had unusual compositions that interfered with sensors, making hidden smuggler bases hard to detect. Secondly, Murka was the home of the Isalamiri, a species of lizards that had a natural ability to prevent nearby Force sensitives from accessing the Force, which meant that Murka was avoided by the Jedi. Some coreward shadowports were outright hidden. Telkur Station, a space station in the Hapes Consortium, was one such place. It was hidden in the depths of the transitory mists, the nebulae that formed the consortium's outer borders, and, as a result, very few people even knew it existed. Port Bianco, a pirate stronghold on the colony's planet Lamax, was another hidden shadowport. Lamax was located near another nebula that made travel to the planet hazardous, and as a result, its region of space was little visited, allowing pirates and smugglers to make regular use of Port Bianco without attracting attention. Another colony's shadowport, the planet Teardrop, was a similar case. Lastly, we have the most popular class of core region shadowport, the legitimate ports that were so busy that the lore just couldn't keep up. Tiran, one of the galaxy's busiest trade worlds, was an excellent example. Tiran, an Inner Rim world on the Polemian trade route, was renowned for its markets, some of which were several miles long, as well as for its bustling spaceports, which were some of the most hectic in the galaxy. Tiran was so crowded and experienced so much traffic that its government had long ago given up on stopping crime altogether. Rather, it had focused on solely preventing violent crime, and it let things like smuggling, petty theft, and the sale of illegal goods continue more or less unchecked. Tiran thus made an excellent shadowport, a wealthy world with access to major trade routes where smugglers could nonetheless operate with impunity. Byblos, a colony's world on the Corellian Run, was a similar case. It was a heavily urbanized mercantile world with extremely busy starports, and though it wasn't nearly as lawless as Tehran, it was still easy for smugglers to avoid the planet's overtaxed customs officials and law enforcement who had some of the busiest starports in the galaxy to manage. This, combined with Byblos's location, made the planet a crucial spice smuggling world, though that wasn't common knowledge. Katara, another well-traveled colonies world, wasn't what you would expect a shadowport to look like, but it was nonetheless one of the most important smugglers' haunts in the galaxy. Located close to the oldest and wealthiest of the core worlds, Katara was a beautiful planet of warm seas, pristine beaches, and tropical forests, dotted with elegant cities known for their architecture, culture, and cuisine. Katara was a paradise, but its spaceports, particularly the city of Haleoda, concealed a thriving smuggling trade. Smugglers visited Katara regularly, using it as a last stop before taking their cargoes coreward. Katara's status as a shadowport wasn't widely known, however, and most of the tourists who came to the planet had no idea of its popularity with smugglers. Lastly, we have the core world Abregado-Rae, a prominent planet in the southern core at the coreward end of the Rimmer trade route. Abregado-Rae was a rural world, and its population was tiny for an important trade world deep in the core, but it was nonetheless very well known, and its spaceports were fairly popular. These ports started off legitimate before turning seedy, and they were still safe for legitimate trade. However, they were mostly used by smugglers and other outlaws. The planet's main spaceport, simply named Abregado-Rae Spaceport, was the most important shadowport in the core worlds, though you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking at it. Unlike many other shadowports, Abregado-Rae's status as a smuggler's haunt was fairly well known, though the outlaws operating in its starports still did their best to keep up appearances and make the planet's ports look legit. So, that's our look at the shadowports of the core world's colonies and inner rim, the outposts of scum and villainy deep in the galaxy's heart. But what do you think? Would you like to see more videos about shadowports in the future? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments below.